From the studios of KPFK Pacifica Radio in Los Angeles, this is Uprising, and I'm Sonali. It's Wednesday, June 17th, 2015. Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tspiras defies his nation's creditors and accuses the IMF of criminality. Less than 2 weeks ahead of a major deadline, we'll get an update on the Greek challenge to austerity politics with my guest Anastasia Romanou. And can a UN conference on Yemen halt the war raging there? Stephen Zunes will share his thoughts on the US-backed Saudi war. Plus, as Pope Francis calls out climate deniers, we'll find out how Hawaii is leading the transition to renewable energy with my guest, climate activist Evan Weber. That's coming up after the news. Joining us now to analyze today's headlines is Courtney Morris. She is an assistant professor of African American and Women's Studies at Penn State University. Hi, Courtney.
Hi, Sonali.
2 studies published by the American Geophysical Union today have identified the most stressed groundwater systems in the world. Researchers concluded that 1/3 of the biggest groundwater reserves are in serious trouble. The Arabian aquifer system was the worst off, a source of water for 60 million people. Closely following is the Indus Basin aquifer underneath northwestern India and Pakistan, followed by the Murzuk-Jajo Basin in northern Africa. The water system under drought-stricken California also made the list but is not as stressed. The research is based on data from 2 NASA satellites that measure dips and bumps in the Earth's gravity, which is affected by the weight of water. The scientists worry that climate change and population growth will only exacerbate the problems. They ask the important question, quote, what happens when a highly stressed aquifer is located in a region with socioeconomic or political tensions that can't supplement declining water supplies fast enough? Well, Courtney, how important is such research for long-term planning? And do you think people will heed the warnings of these scientists?
Well, I think it's difficult to overstate the importance of this research, especially since so little work has been done on the question of groundwater reserves and the impacts of climate change on this resource. And I think that the answer to this question that these scientists are posing, what happens when the water runs out, is conflict. In March of 2012, the Director of National Intelligence here in the United States issued a report basically saying that water wars are going to become more and more common in the future as water runs out. And they predicted that global demand for water was going to outpace current resources, existing resources, by about 40%. So we know that that water wars are going to be a part of our political future, and there seems to be very little planning on the part of national governments to really make meaningful plans for this. So this research is incredibly important. But I think what the report also reveals, and which we should think about as well, is that it shows us that many of the people who will be the first to experience the impact of the water crisis will be people living in places that are already fraught with conflict, very vulnerable populations who are not going to have the resources to protect themselves in the face of that crisis. So it's a very frightening prospect.
And recovering quickly from their defeat of Trade Promotion Authority, Republicans in the White House are attempting to schedule another vote to give the president fast-track authority on the highly controversial and pro-corporate Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, because Democrats last week strategically voted down a companion bill called TAA that would have set up a job training fund for U.S. workers. Pro-TPP lawyers may go ahead with the Trade Promotion Authority anyway. House Speaker John Boehner met yesterday with sympathetic Democrats, and sources told Politico that a new vote on TPA without assistance for workers may be rushed through as early as this week. Meanwhile, the House passed a procedural vote yesterday to enable the TAA bill to be revived anytime until July 30th. So in a nutshell, they hope to pass fast-track authority now and deal with the accompanying job assistance bill later. Courtney, I know this all sounds very confusing, but it seems as though the GOP and even the White House have no problem throwing U.S. workers under the bus in order to get authority for TPP. What do you think?
Well, certainly. I think the lengths to which Republican leaders in the Obama administration are prepared to go to secure fast-track authority really should tell the public that they don't want people to know what's happening in these closed door meetings because they know that the public would not approve of what's being decided. And I think even the call for the trade adjustment assistance, which, is being billed as a sort of protection for workers, is dubious, right? I mean, on one hand, it's essentially a way of providing support for workers who will lose their jobs as a result of the trade agreement. And so so the people who are negotiating this agreement know that workers are going to suffer from what's being decided here. And rather than making the process more transparent, opening it up, making negotiating states more accountable, and actually putting in real and meaningful language in the agreement that would actually protect the interests of workers, they're instead going to give workers a welfare program. And I think that this is so indicative of the kind of neoliberal ethos that is governing all of these negotiations. And we need to continue to political leaders in the House and in the Senate need to continue to push back against fast-track authority.
And finally, a poll in the electoral battleground state of New Hampshire spells good news for presidential candidate Bernie Sanders and bad news for his rival Hillary Clinton. The Suffolk University poll this week found that Sanders has surged ahead in popularity, trailing only 10 points behind Clinton. Among those who know who both candidates are, there is only a 3-point difference, suggesting that Clinton's name recognition is benefiting her. Other polls have found similar results. In other presidential race news, Donald Trump has announced his intention to run in a campaign launch that the Washington Post headlined, "Spectacular, Unending, Utterly Baffling, and Often Wrong." The author of that report, tasked with fact-checking Trump's launch speech, wrote, quote, "Treating Trump's arguments as serious is like treating series arguments as serious. He's programmed to talk about how he's the best and the President Obama is the worst and he can fix everything." Well, Courtney, first, what do you make of Sanders' seeming success? And second, I'm sort of sorry that I even brought up Donald Trump, as we're supposed to be covering serious news here, but I just couldn't resist.
Well, I think Bernie Sanders is a very welcome progressive presence in what is increased, turning into a political circus. But, I think we should view the polls with cautious optimism. We still need to see how he's going to do in states a little bit further away from the Northeast and his home state of Vermont. And he's really going to have a difficult road ahead of him in terms of keeping up with Hillary Clinton and, her war chest. So, cautious optimism, I think, is the word here. But, even if Bernie Sanders, regardless of the outcome, his chances for the nomination look promising. But even if he doesn't get the nomination, I think that he's already playing a very critical role, as we've already seen, in pushing Hillary Clinton to take more explicitly progressive stances on a number of issues, from climate change to student loans to Wall Street reforms. And so that's very important. As for Donald Trump, it's a farce.
Enough said. Courtney, thanks as always for joining us. We'll talk to you next week.
Bye, Sonali.
Courtney Morris is an assistant professor of African American and Women's Studies at Penn State University. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar. Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tspiras blasted his nation's creditors in a defiant speech to the Greek parliament yesterday that made waves around the world. Tspiras accused the International Monetary Fund in particular of, quote, criminal responsibility for crashing the Greek economy in the first place. Tspiras said, quote, IMF positions prevail when it comes to the strictness of austerity measures asked, while at the same time, EU positions prevail when it comes to the denial for any discussion about Greek debt sustainability, end of quote. Many see the speech as adding fuel to the fire between Greece and the Troika, which is the European Commission, the European Central Bank, and the IMF. As the clock runs out for Greece to meet a June 30th deadline to agree to a new bailout plan, fears of Greece simply exiting the Eurozone are all too real. A meeting of EU finance ministers takes place on Thursday, followed by a gathering of EU leaders next week. German Chancellor Angela Merkel said in response to the speech that she would, quote, do everything possible to keep Greece in the Eurozone. Now the U.S. has gotten involved, with U.S. Treasury Secretary Jack Lew making a phone call to Tspiras last night, urging him to accept a compromise solution. Greece Greece is at the heart of an ideological battle between the dismantling of austerity policies versus the supremacy of international global finance and its rules. My guest is Anastasia Romanou. She is a research professor at Columbia University in Climate Studies, a member of Syriza, the party that Tspiras belongs to, and the eco-socialist group System Change, Not Climate Change. She is also founding member of Syriza New York and AKNY. Welcome to Uprising, Anastasia.
Hello.
How significant was Tspiras' speech to the parliament yesterday? And some are saying that that speech marked the real beginning of negotiations.
Yeah, it was a very significant speech because it spelled out to the government, to the Greek people and the different parties in the negotiations that are involved in the negotiations, that this is the most critical point. We have reached the point of decision making. And the Greek government cannot move towards any further propositions, cannot accept the enormous cuts in pensions and salaries and other compromises that the EU counterparties are asking. It is either we negotiate on a fair ground or not at all. So in that sense, it's very clear that the Tsipras speech a couple of days ago.
So what about the description that he uses for the IMF, basically saying that the IMF has criminal responsibility? I mean, those are strong words. Those are strong words for a prime minister.
Yes, I agree. These are strong words for a prime minister, and they are strong words for a body, an international body, monetary fund, which is presumably safeguarding the economic situation and well-being of people across the world, if that is the case, of course. But to the extent that the IMF propositions for reforms in Greece, the fact that they have withheld liquidity from the Greek banks have suffocated actually the economy and have plunged Greece in the worst recession ever in the last 100 years at least, in peaceful times. And I think this Tsipras claim that of criminal responsibility on behalf of the IMF, it's actually fair and accurate. Remember that IMF last year actually admitted that in an internal document which eventually leaked and was highly publicized and was never taken back, that they have made numerous mistakes and that the overall strategy suffers and so forth is problematic. So that's pointing this out by Tsipras is one thing. It has been pointed out by mainstream economists here in the United States, Krugman, Stiglitz, James Galbraith. They have all warned against this politics. The US Senate Budget Office has criticized and has actually urged the Federal Reserve to put pressure on IMF to take back these policies in Greece. And it is a certain tight circle in European Union, the Commission, the European Central Bank, and the IMF leadership, which actually have destroyed Greece. And that is criminal responsibility, and Tsipras is fair to say that.
Now, the speech also is, in a way, I think, meant to rally support within Greece. There is a rally that's scheduled to happen tonight at the Central Square in Athens by supporters of Syriza. Does all of this help to send a strong message to the IMF that not only is Tsipras going to be defiant and strong, but that he has support on the ground? And perhaps Greeks were waiting to see this defiance in Tsipras.
Exactly. So there is a rally planned in Greece. So we have rallies planned across the world, actually, similar times. And it is intended to show that Greeks are united, that the popular movement that actually helped Syriza come into power back 5 months ago is still alive and kicking and demands to not give ground, to not compromise, to not take back the promises that the Tsipras government has made to the people, that it will negotiate until the end, that it will not impose more cuts in pensions and working people's salaries. It will promote a fair taxation system and so forth. And the Syriza government is committed to its base, which is the popular movement and which is organizing right now. So that's a message that will be sent not only to the European Union and the IMF, but also to Greeks themselves, to gain strength and keep keep going.
However, Jean-Claude Juncker, the head of the European Commission, seems to be trying to drive a wedge between the people of Greece and the Greek government. He said in response to Tspiras' speech, quote, "I don't care about the Greek government. I do care about the Greek people. The debate in Greece and outside Greece would be easier if the Greek government would tell exactly what the Commission is really proposing. I'm blaming the Greeks for telling things to the Greek public which are not consistent with what I've told the Prime Minister." What do you make of this statement?
Yes, it was expected. It was expected all along that Syriza will face an enormous pressure from the EU authorities and the creditors. And Mr. Juncker is part of that establishment, the European establishment that has promoted the austerity policies in Europe. So what else is he expected to say? Right. The wedge that he's driving, right, as you very nicely said, the spread of innuendos and false messages, I think it is part of the criminal charge that this group is having, because actually no one said that Juncker, even Tsipras didn't say that Juncker himself has asked for cuts in pensions, etc. But the documents that Juncker is asking Greece to sign, the Greek government to sign, say that explicitly. So Juncker is trying to play a little game here by, masking his responsibility towards the Greek people, and he cannot. And he cannot claim that he cares about Greece, because in Greece right now we have 60% unemployment among the young people, 25% in general. We have shortages in hospitals and in schools. Children are going hungry to school, or they are not going to school at all, and so forth. And so that reality, why doesn't Mr. Juncker care about that reality and the difficulties that Greek people have been experiencing in the last few years?
And of course, the reason this story is such an important one here in the United States and around the world is the fact that what's playing out in Greece is this ideological battle between, as I said earlier, the supremacy of the rules of global finance and a popular revolt against those rules and against austerity politics. And if it can win in Greece, it could win elsewhere. So apparently, Tsipras threatened not to pay the IMF for bailout loans, pay them back if there was no agreement. Is that true? And can Greece just default? And does default automatically then mean a Greek exit from the EU?
Yes. So I think it is correct that Greece, that Tsipras has said that he will not make payments to the IMF if there is no agreement. And certainly he will not make an acceptable agreement by the Greek side. And certainly he will not make a payment if he doesn't have money to pay salaries and pensions. So the country comes first, and then the financial obligations to financial institutions around the world. And that is a fair statement, and that is a correct statement. That's a statement that is accepted by the Greek people. That's why people voted Syriza in that position. Now, what happens if Greece doesn't make a bailout? It doesn't make a payment for the loans, which is it a default? Well, that is a technical question, and I'm not in a place to discuss this. But what I understand is that this is this actually depends on how the markets will react. If there is true solidarity in Europe and with IMF, and they say that, okay, we can make a different plan for the payments, we can stretch the payments out, or we can combine them, or we can pay part of it, and so forth, this would reassure the markets, and there would not be a default. Right? But there is no solidarity among the European Union, in the European Union and the IMF towards Greece. So I don't know how it will eventually be considered, if it's going to be a default. Now, exit from the Euro is not defined, is not expected, and it's not automatic. And I believe that the default is not a Greek exit from the euro.
Right. Interestingly enough, perhaps the only other major European country that is eyeing an exit from the EU is Britain. Spokesperson for, I should say specifically Prime Minister David Cameron. Cameron's spokesperson has said that number 10 is, quote, stepping up plans for a possible Greek exit from the Eurozone. And Britain itself has been playing with that idea through the leadership of Cameron. So there might be some some folks jumping on the Greek bandwagon, hoping to weaken the EU overall.
Yes, it is true, and that is what the Central European Bank and the Commission will have to clearly take into account whose interests they are serving by having such a strict stance against Greece.
And then what sort of pressure is Tsipras facing? We talked about the rallying behind Tsipras of ordinary Greeks, but what about from other parties, political parties in Greece? I understand that he is facing some pressure from opposition parties who, are coming at him from different directions.
Yes, so there is the right-wing Conservative Party and the Social Democrats, of course, who have always supported the austerity policies in Greece, who were in the end, in the end, they were responsible for building up the debt and for bringing the country, signing the previous bailout packages and so forth, and the agreements with the European Union and the IMF. So they are responsible for the previous compromises, and they are obviously pressuring the government to make one more compromise. Because they will look better, of course. But that's one pressure, of course, that doesn't, in my view, doesn't count. It has been voted down by the Greek people. Greek people themselves put Syriza in power, so exactly not to do the same things that the previous governments did. But also Tsipras is facing pressures from its own base, and the mandate that it gave him, and the party members as well, who do not want to give in. Some of them sometimes go to the other extreme, asking him to take Greece out of Europe voluntarily. But this is, of course, is not an option. Tsipras is following what the mandate is, and so I think that he will fight it.
Right. Now, what is the U.S.'s interest in this? I mentioned Treasury Secretary Jack Lew is pressuring Greece to come up with a compromise. Clearly, the U.S. doesn't want to see the Eurozone break up and Greece exit just because it's a convenient ally on the political world for the U.S. to have the EU as a whole. But are there any other interests as well that the U.S. has in this? And what exactly, is the U.S. on the side of Greece or on the side of Germany in this case?
Yes, I would say that the U.S. is actually a better political ally right now than our companions in the European Union. Greece has been a political ally to the U.S. for decades, and without any change in the positions, and even under Tsipras government as well. Greece is situated in a very sensitive geopolitical area, very unstable area at the moment. We have the rise of the fundamentalism in Turkey, and the transition into a coalition government there. Middle East is in uproar, Iran, Israel, and Egypt. So obviously, U.S. doesn't want to create one more instability case in Greece from the people arising from the indignation from the people and the poverty that they are forced into. But at the same time, U.S. is interested in keeping the energy allies, and that is a very critical situation in Greece. Greece has indicated that it will seek collaboration and support from Russia, transport Russian natural gas, allow transportation of Russian natural gas through Greece, and that's against the U.S. plans in the area and the U.S. interests. And of course, economic contagion is one big concern that the U.S. has, that the crisis, like in 2008, the Lehman Brothers collapse, the similar collapse of Greece right now might cause another difficult situation in the financial markets.
Well, we'll see what happens in the next few days and in the week as that June 30th deadline approaches. I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
My guest, Anastasia Romanou, is a research professor at Columbia University in Climate Studies. She's also a member of the Syriza Party and the eco-socialist group System Change, Not Climate Change. She's a founding member of Syriza New York and AKNY. This is Uprising. We'll be right back to take a look at what is happening in Yemen this week. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali. Calling Yemen a, quote, ticking time bomb, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon is struggling to launch peace talks in Geneva this week. The talks were scheduled to start on Monday as so-called preliminary inclusive consultations between Houthi rebels and Yemen's exiled President Abed Rabo Mansour Hadi. Saudi Arabia, where Mr. Hadi has taken refuge, has been bombing the poorest nation in the Persian Gulf for several months. The UN Children's Agency, UNICEF, just reported that 279 Yemeni children have died since March when the war began. Overall, more than 2,500 people have died. And in fact, Saudi Arabian airstrikes reportedly targeted a convoy of fleeing Yemeni civilians just this morning. At least 31 civilians were reported to have been killed in what may have been one of the worst attacks so far. Mr. Ban hopes to launch a 2-week ceasefire of the US-backed war to coincide with the start of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. But the Saudis continued bombing Yemen overnight in the lead-up to the Geneva talks on Sunday. Last Friday, airstrikes destroyed a 2,500-year-old cultural heritage site in the capital, Sana'a. Several residents were also killed and 5 houses destroyed. Saudi Arabia denied dropping the bombs and instead blamed the Houthis. Meanwhile, Al-Qaeda's affiliate in Yemen just confirmed that a U.S. drone strike last week killed their leader, Nasser al-Wuhaishi. Mr. Wuhaishi was considered the second-ranked leader of Al-Qaeda. The White House released a statement saying his death, quote, removes from the battlefield an experienced terrorist leader and brings us closer to degrading and ultimately defeating these groups. Al-Qaeda simply announced another military commander named Qasem al-Raimi to take Wuhaishi's place. Joining me now is a frequent guest on Uprising, Stephen Zunes. He's a professor of politics and international relations at the University of San Francisco, where he directs the program in Middle Eastern Studies. Welcome back to the show, Stephen.
Good to be with you.
Now, how realistic are these UN-backed talks between the Houthis and Hadi? I understand that the latest news is that the Houthis are refusing to negotiate. And why hasn't Saudi Arabia been invited to these talks?
It's looking very difficult that things will move forward. Both sides are being very rigid in their positions. They are both, in effect, using the people of Yemen as hostage for their geopolitical gamemanship. The fact that the Saudis escalated the airstrikes dramatically just when the talks were beginning was not a good sign. Meanwhile, the Houthis blew up the home of the deputy head of the delegation representing the Hadi government yesterday. The Hadi, the exiled regime backed by the Saudis, has been putting down various preconditions for the talks to even begin. The Houthis brought in a delegation more than twice as large as the original agreement. I mean, it's almost like both sides don't want the talks to move forward.
So what about the fact that Hadi is saying he wants to adhere to a UN Security Council resolution that had called on the Houthis to withdraw from territory that they seized? Is it realistic to ask for that at this point in the war?
It does have the authority of the United Nations Security Council behind it, and it's not an unreasonable demand, given that the Houthis are a rebel group representing the only minority of Yemenis. Their offensive is opposed by the vast majority of Yemenis, but at the same time, it does seem unreasonable as a precondition for the talks. The Houthis claim, perhaps with reason, that they are afraid that Al-Qaeda, which is taking advantage of the fighting to expand its territory, could move in to areas that the Houthis currently control. And given that the divided state of the Yemeni armed forces and its very weak position, that indeed it could be a very real threat. So it seems that while it's reasonable to demand that the Houthis do pull back, it probably doesn't make sense for it to be a precondition for the talks to even begin.
Now, one Arab commentator writing in an English language newspaper asked, quote, is Saudi Arabia bringing anything other than chaos to Yemen? I'm wondering what your answer to that question is.
Well, clearly, the extent of the fighting, the extent of the killing has dramatically increased since the Saudi bombing began in March. It has not stopped the Houthi advance. In fact, the only places where they have met effective resistance and indeed have had to pull back are areas where Yemeni civil society organized in massive general strikes and other forms of non-cooperation. And indeed, this is what's really missing from the talks, that is Yemeni civil society. They are the ones who represent the majority of Yemenis. They're the ones for whom power should have been transferred when the former Western-backed dictator Ahmed Saleh was forced down. And instead, the Saudis, with U.S. support, brought in a major general, Saudis Vice President Hadi, to take over, essentially passing the baton to another strongman. Indeed, the violence and civil war that has racked the country for almost a year now, could have been avoided if the United States and other powers had actually supported a democratic transition, rather than to perpetuate the domination of the elites with guns.
Right. So essentially one hijacking of the Yemeni Arab Spring after another. Now, what about the bombing of these ancient sites in Yemen? It hasn't gotten as much attention. Saudi Arabia destroyed, literally obliterated 2,500-year-old structures, of course, killing a number of civilians as well. UNESCO has, the UN agency that oversees historic sites, has denounced, has been the only, I think, strong voice denouncing these. But, I'm remembering when the Taliban destroyed the Bamiyan Buddha statues and there was an outcry across the United States. Of course, the U.S. is completely silent on its ally doing a similar level of destruction.
It's a very good point. And Yemen is an ancient society going back thousands of years, very rich cultural heritage, some really amazing sites that are very much worth preserving. And so in addition to the human toll, the cost of the Saudi bombing to these historical treasures is a real loss.
Now, the killing of Nasser al-Wuhaishi, I mentioned this earlier. Let's turn to that. This was an al-Qaeda leader in Yemen. Al-Qaeda is opposed, of course, to the Houthi rebels. Doesn't weakening al-Qaeda, sort of effectively strengthen the Houthis? Is this just a sort of overlapping of two wars, where the old U.S. drone war in Yemen that predated the Saudi war against Houthis, where it was sort of now seeing an overlapping of these two wars? Is that what's happening?
It's an overlap, but again, when you see the fighting between loyalists of the Hadi regime and the Houthis fighting each other, this has actually enabled al-Qaeda to gain a large swath of territory. There has been civil resistance against the al-Qaeda. I mean, it seems really amazing that nonviolent resistance would be even possible under their regime. But just a couple of weeks ago, in one of their occupied cities, thousands of people poured out of the mosque after Friday prayers and had to sit in front of the al-Qaeda headquarters. The people,
and of course we don't hear about these things.
The people are still trying to fight back, but the al-Qaeda's growth as a result of this turmoil is very serious, and killing one leader may be a minor setback tactically, but until the country's underlying problems are addressed, the threat of al-Qaeda is going to remain a strong one.
Right. They just simply replaced one leader with another. There's always somebody available to take their place who's driven by the anger of having the initial person killed.
Indeed, the drone strikes are what led in many ways to al-Qaeda's growth. In a number of cases, they have killed prominent non-al-Qaeda tribal leaders and other Yemenis who had a popular following among the people, and it drove their entire group into the arms of al-Qaeda. I mean, even more so than we've seen in Pakistan and Afghanistan, the drone war in Yemen has been counterproductive. Even putting aside the legal and moral questions, it has been grossly counterproductive in terms of curbing the al-Qaeda threat.
Finally, Stephen, let's turn back to the UN-led effort to try to at least have a 2-week ceasefire coinciding with Ramadan to enable there to be some, more humanitarian aid to this very poor country. Shouldn't the U.S. be involved in this? Is the U.S. involved in this at all? It's clearly backing the Saudi side and providing it with tactical intelligence and other support in bombing Yemen. Is it doing anything on an international diplomatic level to address the situation?
The United States is not a formal participant in the talks, but there are U.S. representatives there behind the scenes. Though the Obama administration has indeed been backing the Saudi war effort, which I think is very unfortunate, they also are realizing that that the excessive use of force has been counterproductive, and that what really needs to happen is some kind of a negotiated settlement. So the U.S. is trying to play some kind of moderating role, but again, as long as the U.S. continues to support the Saudi bombing, as long as the United States does not recognize that if one wants security, one needs to support civil society and democratic forces, not one faction over another, there's not much positive that the Obama administration can do.
Stephen Zunes, I want to thank you, as always, for joining us and helping to shed some light on this story. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.
My guest is Stephen Zunes, Professor of Politics and International Relations at the University of San Francisco, where he directs the program in Middle Eastern Studies, and he's a frequent guest on Uprising. And we've been talking about the ongoing Saudi bombing, backed, of course, by the United States, of Yemen. This is Uprising. When we come back, we'll take a look at why Hawaii is leading the nation in transitioning to renewable energy and how the rest of the nation might be able to follow. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali. A leaked draft of Pope Francis's highly anticipated encyclical has made headlines for focusing on climate change for the first time ever, and for calling out, among other things, climate deniers. The Pope plans to say that, quote, the poor and the earth are shouting for action on climate change, and that, quote, the attitudes hindering the paths toward a solution, even amongst the believers, go from negating the problem to indifference, to an easy resignation, or to a blind faith in technical solutions. The Pope's proposed words are a salve to climate justice activists who have battled well-funded corporate attacks on the science of climate change for years. But the wheels of change are already rolling, if not in the 49 states in the U.S. mainland, then at least on the 50th island state of Hawaii. In an op-ed in Newsweek, my guest, Evan Weber, writes that, quote, Hawaii is aiming for 100% energy renewables. He now joins us to explain how. Evan Weber is Executive Director of U.S. Climate Plan. Welcome to Uprising.
Hi, happy to be here.
Thanks so much for joining us. And I should mention you were born and raised in Kailua, Hawaii. First, how real is the issue of climate change for Hawaii's residents, more so than in the mainland, I'm imagining?
Well, Hawaii is certainly one of the states being hit first and hardest by climate change. As I was growing up on the island of Oahu, I could really see that transformation happen before my eyes. We used to not get temperatures above 90 degrees in Hawaii. Now we get them regularly. Our beaches are slowly eroding and being lost to climate change. And in fact, the famous Waikiki Beach, which represents a huge portion of Hawaii's economy, is now entirely artificial. It's had to be replenished by costly sand movements to that beach. So climate change is very real for the people of Hawaii, and it's one of the reasons why we're taking action so strongly before the rest of the U.S.
And of course, islands around the world and island nations around the world are vulnerable because as the sea level rises, they will literally start to disappear and sink under the water as the beach erosion suggests. How has Hawaii's legislature made this goal of 100% renewables in the near future a reality? Tell us about the work that the state of Hawaii's lawmakers have done to set this goal for themselves. It's not just an aspirational goal, right? They actually passed a law to get there.
Yes, as of just this past week, Hawaii Governor David Ige signed a bill for 100% renewable energy in Hawaii. And what that means is that by the year 2045, by before mid-century, Hawaii will receive all of its energy, all of its electricity from utilities from renewable sources, the wind, the water, the sun. How it happened was really by legislatures showing bold leadership and doing what was right. Because at the end of the day, they looked at the economics and they looked at the technological barriers and saw that all of those were overcome. It was possible to overcome all of those barriers. And we think that Hawaii in that way can be a model for the rest of the nation because Hawaii actually has specific technological barriers that the rest of the country doesn't have to overcome because of its isolated island grids.
Right, and explain that. I mean, and also it should be mentioned that Hawaii has, in fact, traditionally had to rely more on fossil fuels than other parts of the country, partly because it's been isolated. And so this transition is sort of all the more admirable.
Yeah, so Hawaii has really gone from historically the nation's biggest user of fossil fuels and most dependent on fossil fuels for electricity. And in fact, today, much of Hawaii is still powered by oil, which is pretty unconventional for the rest of the country. Most of the rest of the country gets its electricity from coal and natural gas. But in just 10 years, Hawaii has gone from the state most dependent on fossil fuels to its most aggressive renewable energy producer.
So currently, how much of utilities consumed by Hawaii's residents come from renewable energy? Where's the sort of starting point to that 100%?
Sure. So right now it's around 22%, which isn't the highest in the nation, but the trajectory that we're on and the growth rate will make it that in the next few years.
And certainly anyone sort of driving through Hawaii's cities on the various islands will find unusually high prevalence of solar panels atop the roofs of residential homes. So how exactly is this renewable energy transition slated to happen? Is it mostly rooftop solar? And I should say Hawaii is certainly poised, being in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and having not just year-round sunshine, but also strong trade winds, and of course, having access to water, to have renewable sources of energy from the sun, the wind, and the water.
Sure, it's true that Hawaii has no shortage of renewable resources, as you mentioned, and right now we are the leader in rooftop solar in the nation. 1 of every 8 homes in Hawaii has rooftop solar panels, which makes us the most saturated state for rooftop solar. But I think it's also important to acknowledge that Hawaii is actually not alone in this abundance of renewable resources. In fact, the United States as a whole has enough solar energy potential to power its current electricity demand 100 times over. And for wind, that's 16 times over. The Midwest of America is often called the Saudi Arabia of wind, and certainly the Southwest has no shortage of sunlight days, actually greater than Hawaii. So, it's true that Hawaii is lucky in its renewable resources, but it shouldn't undermine, the the barriers that they've had to go through to get to this 100% goal.
So specifically, what is the sort of infrastructure that Hawaii is looking to build to reach 100% renewable energy powered utilities in the next couple of decades? In addition to, I'm assuming, promoting rooftop solar, is it through state government subsidies? And also, are you building wind farms? What sort of other infrastructure is being built?
Well, it's true that 100% just sets the goal, and there's a lot more that needs to be figured out to determine how to get there. But in fact, the utilities recently did a study that showed that by 2030, that Hawaii could receive almost 70% of its energy from renewables. So this goal is achievable. Some of the infrastructure that will be really important for Hawaii to begin investing in order to ensure that the explosion that we've seen in solar can continue. First and foremost will be utility scale and home scale energy storage technologies. Similar, Tesla Energy made a big splash recently with its announcement of its low-cost battery. More technologies like that will have to be adapted in the islands. In addition to that, updates and improvements to the grid and the electrical infrastructure around the state will be really important. Things like smart meters and smart grid technologies that allow homes and businesses to communicate better with utilities to better balance supply and demand.
So you mentioned energy storage, and of course this is part of the challenge of renewable energy that the fossil fuel industry likes to tout, saying that, oil is just a physical piece of energy, oil, coal, etc. Fossil fuels are real. You can, extract them and then store them, and then they're available as reserves when needed. However, what happens when you're relying on solar energy and you have unprecedented gray weather with very little sun? How do you store renewable energy? And so are you saying that technology is more accessible now than before?
Absolutely. And the truth is this type of technology, there's actually a number of many different storage technologies, many of which have been used for decades and decades. But some of the most advanced technology, like lithium-ion batteries and other things of that sort, are getting more and more cost-effective and are showing the same cost improvement rates that technologies like wind and solar have shown over the past couple of years. So we have every reason to believe that those technologies will continue to improve and that the costs will continue to decline.
Now, Evan, let's talk about the way in which, and you mentioned briefly, the resources that are available to the mainland, the rest of the 49 states, in terms of renewable energy. We know that there's resources. It's a matter of political will. How can the rest of the nation, the 49 states, follow Hawaii's lead? Are you hoping that lawmakers will be inspired to, first of all, set these kinds of goals as Hawaii's state lawmakers have done?
Great question. And so I think the first thing is to really understand the magnitude of what Hawaii has achieved setting this 100% renewable energy target. Like you were saying, Hawaii does have significant challenges that the rest of the nation doesn't have to face. For example, if there's a surge of solar energy in Arizona, neighboring states can receive that energy to balance out supply and demand. The same can be said of if there's a big gust of wind in Iowa. Hawaii is completely isolated, not just from the rest of the U.S., but actually even from itself. There are small island grids, and each island is not connected to each other. So, these claims about variability and that the fossil fuel industry often puts forward as detractors for renewable energy, Hawaii has to overcome those even more so than the rest of the nation. So this really proves that technologically this transition is possible for the U.S. In terms of what needs to be done, again, I think looking at the example of Hawaii is a great place to start. The bill for 100% renewable energy was passed in an unparalleled show of bipartisan political support with a vote of 74-2.
Wow.
in the Hawaii legislature. So Democrats and Republicans put away their partisan bickering and chose to do what was right. And I think that's a really powerful example that the rest of the nation can look towards.
And of course, I think so many of us have just given up on federal action on these issues just because of the GOP's stranglehold on politics in D.C. And so perhaps at the state level, state by state, there is more possibility. Certainly in California, where this program is produced, there is much more political will than in other parts of the nation. But you're in Washington, D.C. right now. What sort of political sort of movement is there in D.C. for, I mean, is there any hope for us to set federal goals, or is it going to have to come from states?
Well, I think that the more states that step up and put forward bold and visionary targets like Hawaii has done, the more people will see that renewable energy is something that's good for the environment, that reduces the biggest risks of climate change. But I think that more what they'll see is that it's something that consumers like, that saves them money and is good for businesses and jobs. And I think that this transition is happening across the U.S. and it's really becoming inevitable. And I think as that continues to move forward, politicians are going to have a lot harder time standing with the fossil fuel industry and against the will of the people. But, you know, there is signs of progress here in D.C. You know, just this past week, two liberal Democrats introduced a bill for a carbon tax, which is very politically toxic. You know, whenever you talk about carbon and tax, those are about the two most politically toxic words in Washington, D.C. But they were actually invited by a conservative think tank, the American Enterprise Institute, to unveil their proposal to a conservative audience. So there is signs of change amongst the different parties here in D.C. And, you know, this change really is inevitable, and it's just a matter of when, not if.
And we should be mentioned, isn't there a stronger than ever before support among Republican rank and file members, the base of the party around the country, for action on climate change like never before?
Absolutely. You know, poll after poll after poll is showing that the American people across party lines support renewable energy and want government action on climate change. A recent Stanford and New York Times poll showed that over half of Republicans would vote for, would less favor a candidate that did not believe in climate change or did not want the government to do anything about it. So even the base of the Republican Party is wanting this change, and it's really a question of whether the people's will can demand that change stronger than the special interests in the fossil fuel industry.
And finally, I'm wondering what you make of Pope Francis's words, the leaked draft of his encyclical appealing to the world to, you know, get it right on climate change. Apparently, this is the first time that a pope has ever addressed the issue of climate change, and he's used extremely strong words.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think all of us are very excited about the Pope's encyclical that he'll be officially releasing in English tomorrow. You know, at the end of the day, you know, all this talk about jobs, the economy, renewable energy, electricity, and all of that. At the end of the day, this really is a moral issue, and it's about doing what's right. It's about protecting the planet and our societies for future generations. And the Pope, as one of the most, you know, well-respected and listened to moral authoritative figures coming out in such a strong way, I think, will have effects that we can't even imagine at this point. So we're very much looking forward to the Pope's words.
And finally, Evan, let's also talk about the fact that even if Hawaii, the island state of Hawaii, the multi-island state of Hawaii, has taken strong action on climate change itself, climate change is a global phenomenon. Hawaii transitioning to renewable energies isn't going to protect Hawaii. It simply adds the weight of Hawaii's, change to the rest of the world. It needs to be a global effort to combat climate change. If the rest of the country, if the rest of the world doesn't go along, Hawaii and other islands around the world will still disappear underwater.
Yes, it's a sad truth, but around the world we're seeing the countries and the people that are most vulnerable to climate change being the first to act and being the strongest leaders, whether it's countries in Africa like Ethiopia, who just put forward a very ambitious pledge to be zero carbon within the next few decades, or small island nations like the Maldives, who have long had a carbon neutral goal for the past several years. It's true that these countries, these small countries or small island states like Hawaii acting alone will not solve the problem of global climate change. But hopefully, in the places where the politics are right, whether it's a small state like Hawaii or a large state that represents a huge portion of the U.S.'s economy, like California, this change that's coming from the ground up can really serve as an example to show people what's possible and move countries and the world forward in the right direction.
And Evan, tell us about the U.S. climate plan that you are the executive director of and where people can find out more information.
Sure. Well, U.S. Climate Plan is a climate policy advocacy organization based here in Washington, D.C. And we are really trying to build the power that is needed to get the political will necessary for bold and ambitious climate policy and legislation in the U.S., which we believe is ultimately necessary, like I was just saying, to move the world forward to a safe and livable future. And you can learn more about us on our website at usclimateplan.org.
That's usclimateplan.org, and we will post that to our website, uprisingwithsonali.com, where we will also have a link to the op-ed that Evan recently wrote or co-wrote on Newsweek. Evan, thanks so much for joining us. Best of luck to you.
Thanks for having me. My
guest, Evan Weber, is the executive director of U.S. Climate Plan. The piece that he recently co-authored in Newsweek is entitled, "Hawaii is Aiming for 100% Energy Renewables. Can the Nation Follow?" Evan was born and raised in Kailua, Hawaii. This is Uprising. Anna Buss is our assistant producer and technical director. Christian Beck is our production coordinator. Federico Garcia and Kiana Turner are our audio engineers. Annie Mendoza is our social media coordinator. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/uprising with Sonali. Your subscription sustains the TV production of this show. Our website is uprisingwithsonali.com. Our theme music is by Quetzal. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar, host and executive producer of Uprising. I'll see you next time.